Diego's going to be doing his second speech, organizer's speech on environmental justice. It's great that you're a very new member and already working on your second speech. I was a little slower than that. Do we have a volunteer to handle table topics for this meeting?
You don't need to go over. It's been slow
What am I doing? My primary?
Rosemary.
Yeah.
Rosemary, are you a current Toastmasters member?
No, not a member.
Have you seen how table topics work before?
Once.
You familiar with it? So you're comfortable coming up with questions then?
Oh, question? Yeah. I do
Yeah,
have
and
There's a
questions.
sheet.
Okay, great.
That gives her.
Thanks for
Yeah,
jumping
we
in
have
on
them
that.
for just this occasion.
All right, and Thomas is going to be our first evaluator. Joseph is going to handle timing.
ideas.
Lawrence is going to be grammarian. David will be our general evaluator, and then Lawrence is going to do an educational speech at the end of our meeting.
Print up what this means.
Who was the timer?
Joseph.
Right.
And who's the grammarian?
Okay, great. So we have our roles
Pick up.
filled.
We only have one
What's that?
speaker.
What's this mean?
We'll get
Yes,
to
we have
that.
one speaker.
We'll get
Well, I'm
to
supposed to be the one that gets to that.
Oh, well, there you go. You can read it back to that. So why don't we begin by describing our roles? Lawrence, you're grammarian this evening. Would you explain that role for us?
Okay, the role of the grammarian is to look at grammatical issues that people have while they are speaking. I'm not very good at that, so it's a challenge to me. But the other thing that they do is they look for filler words like, am, well, and so on.
You know.
Yes, all of those kind of words, they're filler words that we try, as Toastmasters, we try to remove those from our conversation because they're filler words. Basically, you don't know what else to say or you're stumbling, and so instead of just pausing and letting your mind clear and move on, you try to fill up the space. And it's not necessary to do that, so we try to avoid doing that. Also, just like that one that I just did. Also, what we do is we have a word of the day. And everyone in their speeches or table topics or whatever, they should try to use the word of the day in their talking. And tonight's word of the day is unwanted. It's a profound, or it's unaccustomed, unusual, or unexpected. Unwanted. To use it in a sentence, the profound silence, my thoughts too began to take an unwanted clarity and seriousness. By Jeremy Clark in The Spectator. Also another one, I began by being singularly cheerful and lighthearted. All sorts of half-forgotten things to talk about came rushing into my mind and made me hold forth in a most unwanted manner. That's Charles Dickens in David Copperfield. Unaccustomed, unusual, or unexpected is an unwanted experience.
Thank you for that, Lawrence. David's handling the general evaluator role. David, would you describe that role for us, please?
So I'll be handling the general evaluator role, and I'll be evaluating the entire meeting and the evaluators themselves. I'll call on the timer and the grammarian to give their updates as to how the meeting went, what the times were, what the filler words were, who did the fillers, and then I'll complete it with an evaluation of everything. Shouldn't take too long, and with only one speech tonight, we gotta drag things out a little bit to meet our 1 hour, so I'm trying to continue to go here to fill a little time. And that's the role of the general evaluator.
And Joseph is handling a timer role. Joseph, would you describe it?
I'll be the timer tonight, and essentially while people are giving their speeches, I'll be holding up these 3 colored sheets of paper. Green to signal that you've met the recommended amount of time to be speaking. Amber, just this whitish short of paper to show that you've been going on for a while and that soon you should probably try to wrap things up. And red to show that you should definitely be trying to wrap up your time.
Okay. Thank you, Joseph. Well, let's move on to our first speaker. Diego's going to do his second speak, organize your speech on environmental justice.
Thank you, Joseph. Fellow Toastmasters and guests, I'm here before y'all today to talk a little bit about the environmental justice and the climate justice movements that really impacted my life for the better and really inspired me to think more about environmentalism and what opportunities we as a society can do to support the many creatures and communities that are fortunate enough to share this beautiful planet with us. I'm also going to wrap up with explaining a bit about what we can do as a group to support these important movements. So the environmental justice movement is concerned with providing all human communities, whether you're low income to high income, if you're in a predominantly white community or a very diverse community. Environmental justice believes that all communities deserve equal protection under the law on environmental hazards like toxic landfills, coal-fired power plants, things like that that harm the well-being and welfare of human communities. This movement gained national attention in 1982 when a PCB landfill was proposed to be built in a predominantly African-American community of Warren County in North Carolina. In response to this sighting, there was unwanted resistance from the African-American protesters who realized that these types of synthetic chemicals that are associated with skin conditions like acne, rashes, and liver damage as well, recognized that this site would be a huge threat to their well-being and welfare. Despite their efforts, the landfill was still placed, and it existed for almost 20 years in the community, and it was finally considered closed in 2003. So for 17 years, this community had to put up with these types of dangerous chemicals. As a result of this level of determination and resistance from these protesters, the national consciousness finally started thinking about how should we dispose toxic waste across the planet and in our communities in the United States. And many research institutions and agencies in the United States started researching what is the level of risk for different communities to be exposed to environmental hazards like contaminated drinking water sources and landfills. And what they found was that race and class are inextricably linked with a higher rate of exposure to these types of dangerous chemicals and unwanted land uses. As a result of this environmental justice philosophy and movement, the mainstream environmentalism movement changed fundamentally, because now we could see that environmental quality plays a huge role in the success of communities' welfare or neglect or a blight, I want to say. So in many ways that the environmental justice movement transformed the environmentalism movement in general, the climate justice movement accomplished in many ways the same thing about the climate change issues that we are facing as a society today. We are all familiar that greenhouse gases are making our planet warmer, raising the likelihood of extreme weather events. However, the level of responsibility across the globe is different. In the developing nations, who are producing less greenhouse gases than the developed nations, they are facing the greatest consequences of climate change and the worst impacts of climate change because they do not have access to as many tools and resources as we in the developed nations do. And so the crux of the climate change philosophy, the climate justice philosophy, is acknowledging the fact that the communities that are least responsible for climate change are the ones bearing the worst consequences of climate change. Some examples that I want to talk about include Hurricane Katrina in 2005, which was strengthened by warmer waters in the Gulf, caused great damage to the New Orleans community as a whole, but specifically with low-income and minority communities that were located near toxic waste facilities, they also had to face contaminated floodwaters from these sites that suffered from the flooding damage. Children are another important community that are often talked about in climate change and climate justice activism because they are not spewing as much greenhouse gas emissions as the adults and the parents do. And yet they are going to face many more years of the issues of climate change than we in our current generation do. And so each of these communities that I talked about are all linked in the sense that each of them are vulnerable to climate change in their own different ways. But most of them overall have less tools and resources at their disposal to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And finally, the climate justice activism let us realize that wildlife and our vulnerable community members across our global society are facing the impacts of climate change, and we have an opportunity to do our part to reduce our carbon footprint in order to benefit these communities who in many ways we might not meet in our lifetimes. So now that I've talked a little bit about what issues climate justice activism and environmental justice activism are concerned with, I want to wrap up with a few remarks on what we can do here to support these movements. In terms of environmental justice, I talked a lot about landfills and how trash accumulates in certain communities. And a great way we can go about reducing the rate at which we grow these landfills is by reducing our use on single-use products and recycling. For example, rather than counting on paper cups at Starbucks and Carpe Diem, we can turn to using our own reusable coffee mugs. That's less paper waste in landfills, for example. We can also dine in at restaurants like Panera instead of counting on paper to-go boxes and things like that. We can also bring our own Tupperware instead of using the styrofoam to-go boxes when we want to take leftovers for later. In terms of climate justice, we can support politicians who are supportive of green legislation and sustainable business practices, as well as encouraging carpooling to functions and events, using water more effectively, and finally switching to more energy efficient appliances to reduce our energy waste, and that means there's less coal being burned in Alabama power plants. So to wrap up, in conclusion, and the environmental justice and climate justice movements have taken a new level of importance in our society now that we see that our federal government is taking less initiative and leadership on these types of issues. We have an opportunity as a community to take on a leadership level at the citizen level to indicate that these are issues that we find very important. And we are witnesses and can be advocates for a new era in civil rights that acknowledges that clean environment should be a basic human right for all people and all societies. Mr. Toastmaster.
Diego? So we'll move on to our table topics session. And I'm sorry, give me your name one more time.
Rosemary.
Rosemary, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Rosemary's going to be running table topics. Thanks for jumping in and filling in that role. Thanks, Rosemary.
Hey guys. So I just rattle off questions. It's really.
Basically, the gist of it is find a volunteer or ask for a volunteer or assign someone to speak. And then I typically give them the topic before they approach the podium, and it gives them that walk up to the podium to get their thoughts together and launch into their speech.
Okay. Thank you for this list of questions. It definitely helps. So for some of us, maybe I know for me, Lent has started, and most of my friends or most people I know really take this time to maybe try to lose weight, maybe not drink Coke or soft drinks or omit desserts, but I like to take it as a time of more self-reflection, self-adjustment, check and adjust, see if I'm headed towards where I want to be as a person in my career, professionally, personally. So with that, these are those type of questions that I would ask myself. So the first question I will ask is, how do you define success? Do we have a volunteer?
I'll take all that one.
Awesome.
Success means a little different meaning for everybody. For me, success is how I'm doing professionally, how I'm doing personally, how I'm doing emotionally, how I'm doing physically. As we can see, I'm failing physically. But emotionally, I'm a very happy person. I have a great marriage. I have a wonderful family. My daughter works for me, which means she's out of my house because I pay her enough to pay her own rent. And she's married and I have a beautiful grandchild. So emotionally and my family, I define success as happiness with all of us, and we are all very happy and enjoying ourselves. Professionally, I define success as a business owner of 3 companies. Are my businesses successful? 1, yeah, maybe not so much. 2, yes, definitely doing very well, and we just started a 3rd. Does that define success? Maybe, maybe not. Financially, success for me is financial independence, which for me means that my income from passive investments, whether it be in the stock market, whether it be from real estate or whatever, I don't have to actively work for that income, exceeds my expenses. I'm not there yet either, but we're close, and I have a goal to be there by the time I'm 55. I still have 7 years, and we're getting pretty close to getting to that point. So this is how I define success. Hopefully everyone in this room is successful in some way or another. Mrs. Toastmaster.
David? Oh, thank you. It was, it's nice to know how different people define success. So I liked getting to know you a little bit more. So my next question is, I wrote so tiny. Where do you seek happiness? You?
A very interesting question when you ask, where do you seek happiness? Because this statement implies that happiness is somewhere different than where you are. But this is absolutely not true. I don't seek happiness because happiness is here. And happiness is the route to get to everywhere else. You can't go somewhere and get happiness. You have to be happy. And when you are happy, then happiness finds you. And happy people find you. And the more happy people that find you, the happier you become. And then the more happy people that come around, and before you know it, you live in a whole environment of happiness. And then people come looking for you because they are looking for happiness, just like we are looking for our Madam Topic Master.
Yeah, I like the philosophy of you choose to be happy. You choose happiness. Okay. Our next question, or next topic is, what is something you want to improve on? Okay.
Fellow Toastmasters, honored guests. One thing I'd like to improve on is my social awkwardness. I am the guy who's very much known for making the unwanted comments, the awkward pauses in a conversation. I am the guy who shows up to a party and sits in the corner if you want the party to go well. And so the one thing I would like to improve on is not being socially awkward. However, the only way to improve on it is to put yourself in situations where you're gonna be. And I'm not comfortable in those to start with, so it's probably gonna be a long road. I was top taskmaster.
Tom. Thank you, Tom. Do we want to keep going? Okay.
Let's do one more.
Let's do one more. This is a good one. What is the greatest life lesson you've learned so far?
Don't be afraid to pick somebody.
Picking you. Can I pick if you're the time?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yeah, Justin will just fill in that role.
Oh, okay. You're the closest, and I'm right-handed.
The greatest lesson that I would say that I've learned in my life would have to be that there's almost always a way, no matter what you're facing or what you're doing. The reason that I came to this conclusion actually was sort of funny. I was outside of my house and I had been locked out. I forgot my key somewhere inside of my house. I didn't know if anyone was going to be home when I got there, and nobody was. No, there is no spare key anywhere underneath a mat or anything, and I checked 3 times that day. And I remembered something from my past. I remembered that my mom would not lock a windowsill. And I got lucky, and she had happened to have forgotten to have locked it that day, or the day prior. It was one of those days. And I got into my house. I had to stumble over my kitchen sink because that was where the windowsill was at. But I still made it into my house, and I remembered there's always a way if you remember things, if you remember certain topics or certain things that happen around you, and you pay attention to the things that are around you, and you find patterns in life, you can always find a way to overcome something. It really doesn't matter what it is, unless it is literally destined to not happen. If there was nothing that you could have done from the start, then it was destined to happen. But there's always a way to overcome things like that. If you look and you observe and you remember the patterns around you. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin, for sharing your greatest life lesson with all of us. Okay, last question. B, where do you find peace? Susan?
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster. Toast people, guests. Where I find peace. It's kind of interesting that that would be the question that I was called on to expound on. I'll have to say, the place, I've been around a while, and the place that I find peace is in Christ. And that has been a long road that started when I was probably about 10, 11, 12 years old until today. And the longer I live, the less I know, really. Even though I've studied God's Word for many, many years, it's like the world is a very big and mysterious place, And if you know Christ, who is the creator of the world, somehow it seems to boil down to a much more manageable life. And we talked about happiness. Well, you know, there is a difference between happiness and joy, because happiness is fleeting, but true joy is found in the stability and the knowing that you're loved, and you have the option to choose forever instead of just a temporal existence here on earth. So, thank you very much, Madam Toastmaster.
So thank you to all of you that shared great personal viewpoints and lessons, and I think it's great to learn from other people, and really appreciate all of you sharing these lessons with us. So back to Mr. Toastmaster.
Yes, Mr. That was great. Thank you so much for that intro. Appreciate that. So we'll move on to the evaluation portion of our meeting, and David is going to be handling that for us. Come on up, David.
Thanks, sir. Our first speech this evening was given by Diego. Actually, he gave both speeches, the first and the last one. So the person that will be evaluating Diego is Thomas, and he will be evaluating both of Diego's speeches, his first and his last one.
So Diego's speech was from the Competent Communicator Manual. It was organizing your speech. It has some general metrics, all of them rated from 1 to 5, 1 being needs work, 5 being excellent. So speech value was the first thing it asked about, and I said it was excellent. It seemed to be, it was interesting to me, and it seemed like it meaningful to everybody in the audience. Everybody appeared to be as riveted as I've ever seen people be about scientific type topics, which is really impressive. He had excellent preparation. You could tell he knew his topic very well and had researched both how the climate justice movement and the environmental justice movement not only currently are, but also how they started. His organization, I said, was really good because he showed the similarity between the movements, but he also explained them one at a time, which when you're talking about things that are kind of the same, it's really easy to get confused if you're jumping back and forth. And so I said he did really good on that. His opening was excellent, just explained why he was wanting to talk to us about this. The body was excellent. I could figure out when he was transitioning from one thing to the next. And his conclusion, I thought, was super awesome in that it wasn't just, and so now you know the history and all the stuff about this thing. It was, this is what you can do to be part of this movement that's not even actually like, you know, going to meetings and fundraising. It's just small things you could change in your life to make this movement more effective. What could he have done to have this speech be more effective? He was covering a lot of information, and that's not a problem. He was covering it really fast, though. And so there were points where I was struggling to keep up, because I was having to take some notes at the same time. And so if anybody was trying to take notes, it would have been really difficult. And so maybe just slow it down a bit, be a little bit more calm with the delivery, and that would help in a more lecture style format. What did I like about the speech? I liked how clear it was on what they are, why they exist, why they're important, and just the knowledge that was imparted to us, I thought was really awesome, and I like that research that had been done and that information that was passed on.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm going to add just a little bit to that the introduction that you gave, the story, just kind of captured all of us with the catastrophic event of the neighborhood in North Carolina. It just kind of caught all of our attentions to listen to what you were going to say going on with that. So I just wanted to bring that up. I thought that was great. Joseph, our timer, can you give us a timer's report, please?
Oh, you actually presented.
You could remain seated.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you can come up. It's okay. If you want to be up in front of everybody, I'm sure we wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
Shake your hand.
Normally for the individual.
I can
roles.
shake. I wasn't sure. I thought you were doing.
I want to shake handed.
The first speaker today, Diego, had a good time of 7 minutes and 18 seconds. During table topics, David, you had 1 minute and 51 seconds. Lawrence?
Yes.
All right, good. The second speaker, Lawrence, had a time of 1 minute and 19 seconds. Third speaker, Tom or Thomas, had a time of 50 seconds. I had a time of, as the fourth, Joseph had a time of 1 minute and 45 seconds. And Susan had the time of 1 minute and 43 seconds, making David the longest speaker. Eval 1, or the only eval, I guess, was 2 minutes and 44 seconds. That's
So since he had to give the first and the second evaluation, does that mean he got double time? I guess not. Okay, bad joke. I tried. What can I say? Lawrence, can you give us the grammarian report, please?
Yes. The grammarian's report. Diego, I really liked your speech. I generally stop at 5 when I'm counting ums and ahs and such like that, because if you've had 5, then obviously you need some improvement, and I don't bother counting after that. And you did get 5. Also, you had situations where you used the same word twice or the same phrase twice. And my understanding of why this happened was because you were running like a racehorse. You need to slow down and speak more plainly, because another thing that you did that I noticed was you quite often misplaced your climate change for climate justice. So you would say climate change, and then you change it to climate justice. And that was in part because you were in such a hurry that you were able to you were speaking before you were actually thinking. So I don't normally like to give only negative things, but it was a really good speech otherwise. And I think that most people in the real world would barely notice those things, but we're Toastmasters. All right, Rosemary, you also had enough ums and ahs to get through. And also, you used the term "you know." And very often, we don't know. That's why you're telling us. So, but otherwise, you did a very good job for being your first time up there. We did enjoy your topics, and you were very clear in presenting them, and you had good, a segue between topics, which really made it very appreciated. Justin, I noticed you had a few ums and ahs, but not that many. David and Thomas, I didn't really notice much of anything in yours. Joseph, you did really good during your table topic, but you had at least 2 ahs or ums in your evaluation. So that could be improved. Susan, thank you very much for getting up and putting yourself in front of the group as being your second time in our club. You did have your quantity of ums and ahs, and you also had you knows. but I think one of the filler words you use is and. You had like sentences that were 3 miles long because you did this, and then you did that, and then you did this, and so it was like you were connecting sentences with and instead of pausing and letting your thoughts catch up with you. Another thing that I noticed, and it's a little bit out of my league here, this is normally the topic or the general evaluator that brings this kind of thing up, but there is no podium up here. It's only a lectern, because a podium is where you put your feet, right? So that there's no higher spot to be a podium. And the young lady was a topic master, not a Toastmaster. Okay? But they're just small things. But anyway, Mr. Evaluator.
I find it unwanted
Yeah.
that you did not notice that Thomas used the word of the day.
First time in 3 months.
I didn't catch it.
Bad about the word of the day.
I caught it.
Damn.
And thank you for evaluating the meeting for me. I guess that means I don't have much left to do.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I didn't
We
mean
needed
to
the
take
time.
it away,
so
but-
it was, there you go, I used a filler word, so.
Yeah. And
I thought
we
the,
had two uses of our
unwanted, that's right.
our word of the day today.
I think we had a great meeting, even though we only had one speak, we filled it really well. Rosemary, you did an incredible job for only even seeing it done once before and then coming up and trying to do that. Don't worry about your ums and ahs, those will come. Even Thomas is saying, great, you did a really, really good job. Your topics were spot on, I loved them. We, as entrepreneurs, at least for my side of the fence that is an entrepreneur, we kind of live by almost everything that you touched on. And again, your speech, the way you drug us in the beginning, whether you're on one side of the fence or the other on those topics, you drug us in right in the beginning with that story that you gave. One other thing, to touch on what he said about racing through your speech, one thing you may have been able to do, you seem to have had enough material on both the hazardous material side and the climate change side. You probably could have broke that up into 2 different speeches, and that would have slowed you down and you'd have done a lot better. That said, I'm going to go ahead and give the lectern back to the Toastmaster and conclude the meeting.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, sir.
Lawrence is going to be doing an education overview for us. I believe you're going to be handling the new pathways. What up, Lawrence?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening, good evening. As you all may know, or may not, some of our guests may not know, but we are starting a new program in Toastmasters, and it is called the Pathways Program. Right now we have a series of books that we're using. You do your Competent Communicator and Competent Leadership, and they are separate paths along the same line to becoming a better communicator and leader. Well, the new Pathways program is going to come along, and it's going to have, you can do it either online or off, and I'll get into that, but it's going to have a series that goes from start to finish, and it's all encompassing in a single path. So there are many paths you can take, and there are over 300 competencies that you can develop in the various different paths, depending on your own personal desires and whichever path you choose. So, Pathways is the newest program, the newest learning experience. So we are going to be able to get started in Pathways in May. Hopefully in middle of May, we will be able to start the Pathways program. Those of us who are currently in the old program, if we desire to do so, we can continue that program for 2 more years. But at the end of 2 years, that program will be over, and it will be 100% this program. So those of us who are new, although you can get started in the current program very quickly, you can get some experience and then move into this program. So the Pathways program has different things that you can do. They have a choose your path. So one of the things that you can do is they have a system where you go in and you do a bunch of questionnaire, and then they will recommend for you 3 different paths that they think will meet your goals. You don't have to do those paths, but they do give you recommendations. And from my understanding right now from the people who have already started Pathways, the majority of the people who do Pathways that have done that assessment will follow one of the paths that have been given as that option. And then once you do that, then you can go through and pick out where you want to go. You can easily log in and get to your current path. And then through the navigator is another point there. Okay? The navigator is your system that the new manual that you reference throughout the entire time that you are working in Pathways. You can access the navigator to get information about how to do different things, because in some of the different paths you will have responsibilities that might be different than a path that you've done previously, so you may want to access that later on. It's an easy-to-use guide to the Toastmaster experience. It'll walk you through Pathways, defines the club meeting roles, explains who the officers are, and gives you tools and tips that will help you to get where you want to go. Okay, then you can choose how you want to do your path. Do you want to do it online, or do you want to do it in print? Some people would still prefer to have a printed book in front of them. Other people are more than happy just to do it online. So if you do it online, you pay for your path, and then you're good to go. That's it. Whereas if you want to get a printed copy, then it costs a little bit more to get it printed up and mailed to you. So you could print up the parts of it that you want at home alone in your spare time, or you can have them send you one for a slightly higher cost. So also your evaluations are going to come. You can have them done online. You can print up a paper, scan that paper, and then you will have your proper path set up. You'll have all the information you need to have. Okay? The Pathways assessment. As I mentioned, there is an opportunity for you to go through an assessment, answer a series of questions, and then have Toastmasters, their program, decide for you, well, these are the 3 that are most likely to fit the profile that you've set up through those questions. So that's going to be your assessment. So you start right in on that and you move on. Then you get a choice of different programs. So right now they have these programs. Okay, these are the main paths that you can take. Now they are currently doing more paths. So as time goes on, they're going to be increasing the paths that you are doing. And one of them that I was just reading about recently is going to be humorously speaking. You know, how to present humor and do comedy. So there's going to be a whole program on how to become, basically do stand-up comedy or, you know, improv or something like that. So it's going to be interesting. I'm going to do that one when it comes out, I know for sure. But for instance, this person, they went through their whole assessment, and now it's telling them, well, these are the 3 things that would be most likely to fit their profile. But they don't have to. They can uncheck all of those and check whichever one they want, and then they can move on to the next section after they've done that. And this shows you kind of how you would assess those programs. So you answer a few simple questions that narrow down your interests and experiences, and then when you've answered those questions, it can tell you these are your recommended paths. For this guy, it was dynamic leadership, pervasive influence, and effective coaching. So those are things, are different speeches or speech topics or general topics that it would give you. So that's a basic assessment to get started in, and so that is where I'm going to end off for today. But once you get into those programs, you will see that Pathways is going to be a really exciting adventure for all of us. And I personally am very much looking forward to getting started in the Pathways program. Mr. Toastmaster.
Lawrence, well delivered, very informative. I'm excited about the pathways too. There's a lot of great paths that are listed in those, and I think I'll have a hard time picking one of those. The project planning, the change management, the motivating others, all of those sound.
Typical engineers.
Yes. They call the engineer when it's absolutely. All right. Well, I will hand the lectern over to Thomas.
So we have no awards for this evening. However, I have been informed that in the next few weeks we'll have an award for somebody who's finished their competent leadership. So first of the leadership. Right, Speechcraft starting next month.
Next month on the
Our club,
22nd?
22nd.
yeah, 22nd of next month. Our club will be on, that's a Thursday night. Beginning those on Thursday nights on the 22nd of March, our club, along with the 3 other clubs that make up the Mobile area, will be supporting a program that Lawrence and Maurice have been working on called Speechcraft. It'll be held here. I do not remember the time, but I'll give you the time.
6:45.
Okay, 6:45. So same time, same place.
But it's going to be a 90-minute program.
Yeah.
90-minute class on communication and leadership, open to the public. Please invite friends, families, and strangers on the street to come and join us for a wonderful adventure in communication and leadership.
So if you would like to support additionally beyond just, getting the word out, I know that Lawrence and Maurice are looking for people to serve as mentors for the people who will be going through Speechcraft. So if you'd be willing to serve as a mentor, please approach Maurice or Lawrence after the meeting and discuss it with them. The agenda for next week. Who would what? Yu Ying normally does this as our VP of Education, but she is not here this week, so the ball's on me. Most importantly, who will be our who would like to volunteer to be Toastmaster for next week?
I'll do Toastmaster.
Okay,
Put me in for a possible speech next
so
week.
reserve speaker or first speaker?
Hold on. Time out.
Next week is,
27th, right?
yeah.
25th.
What's today, the 19th?
19th.
26th.
Okay, that's 2 days before my wife's birthday. I'm good.
Okay.
Just had to make sure. I knew it was next week.
You're right, man. You're right. I don't come on my wife's birthday either. Or my daughter's. Or my son's.
Yeah, I'll do Toastmaster.
Okay. So Maurice, is that volunteering
For a speech.
Okay.
Until unless put me in for a speech unless.
Can you request one on
Yeah.
Easy Speak so I can
Yeah, I can do
fill
that.
that in?
Yes.
Oh, so that's how you do it. You request the Toastmaster to,
So you request it, so
Speech.
there's a little button that says request a speech.
Yes.
I'm sure you've seen it if you're
Yes.
looking hard. And you'll fill out like, oh, this is my second speech, all this stuff. And then we'll be able to, whoever is the Toastmaster or myself or you, Ying, can punch you in.
And you can also request anything else.
Oh, yeah.
So you can go a week ahead and request that you want to be topic master or Toastmaster. or
I have
whatever.
created every meeting from now till June.
You have?
nice.
I have created every meeting while I am president. Once I'm not president, somebody else will figure it out. But while I am president, there has been a meeting created for everyone that we can possibly hold. So you can start volunteering all the way up to June.
Forward thinking, I like it.
Do we have a volunteer for Table Topics Master? Susan. What's your last name, Susan?
Murphy.
Okay.
You can put me in as a reserve speaker and anything else that you need me to do, as always.
Okay.
I gotta get some real speeches in.
General Evaluator. Okay, since we have no volunteers for that,
I'll take it.
Justin. Okay.
I'm sorry, I spoke too long.
I just wanted to get the key leadership roles filled in. And Maurice was because he volunteered for a speech without me asking. So, with that, I'll try to get an email out tomorrow to remind everybody to go on to Easy Speak and volunteer and get all those who get everybody punched in so that you can access Easy Speak. With that, we're adjourned. See you next week.
Can I ask a question? I know we're adjourned. but,
That's fine.
So as far as the